These are the times that try men's souls. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Look at what's going on in America and around the world today, and tell me how this statement is not true, made by Thomas Paine in context of the Revolutionary War. These are the times that try men's souls. Yes, indeed, we are facing these times right now. And before I get into that, I want to give a quick heads up. If you like Bold and Blunt, why not subscribe to Bold and Blunt? You can do so at edify.app/podcast, where you will find Bold and Blunt among the sensational lineup of faith-based podcasts that this online platform has to offer. You can subscribe there, or of course you can go to washingtontimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, find the newsletter section, and sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter, where you will get right to your email box all my commentaries I write at the Washington Times, along with my regular Bold and Blunt podcasts. Love to have your support. Am grateful for those out there who already support Bold and Blunt, as well as the Washington Times. So these are the times that try men's souls. You remember that quote? Go back to your school days. Maybe if you're in public school, you didn't actually get into Thomas Paine and founding fathers and constitutional issues and American revolutionary truths. But if you go back far enough in public school systems, this used to be standard civics course material. It was called The Crisis by Thomas Paine, December 23rd, 1776. These are the times that try men's souls. And the Heritage Foundation has put together this quick clip, this quick 2-minute video clip, where you can read about the history of this pamphlet that was written by Thomas Paine. And I just want to play the background music and read from you what the Heritage Foundation has just put together for a brief rundown of the history of this. Listen up. It was 1777, the second year of the Revolutionary War. General George Washington's army was on the brink of collapse. Their capital, Philadelphia, had fallen to the British, and winter threatened to finish them as they camped at a place called Valley Forge. Poorly supplied, they faced not only the cold, but disease and starvation. Some perished, many lost hope in the cause and deserted. Thomas Paine, a British-born author, had supported the Patriots from the outset of the war. He'd written a pamphlet called The Crisis to encourage them in their efforts. Amidst the hardships at Valley Forge, the pamphlet was read aloud. The stirring message called on them to hold fast to their cause. These are the times that try men's souls, it read. And then it went on for several minutes and talked about the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot, how these types will in crisis, in times of great crises, shrink from the service of their country. But he petitioned, he implored, he said, those who stand by now deserve the love and thanks of man and woman. And look at what's taking place in America right now with the ongoing coronavirus crisis, with the ongoing government clampdowns of individual liberties. You as an individual in this nation may not realize and may not draw the connection between crisis times and the pandemic that we've been living under for the last couple years and the breakdown of the Constitution. But I can tell you that it seems very much like a constitutional crisis that Americans have suffered under the last couple years. Just because many in America have not seen that crisis occurring does not make it any less of a crisis. When you, as a member of a church in America, are told that you cannot go to church because the government has shut down your church because of a thing called a coronavirus virus, and you're forced at government will, at government order, not legislatively passed law, but a government mandate, a government fabricated order, That you have to stay home and worship God, the creator of all, online, over the phone, or some other such long distance way? That's a constitutional crisis, because the foundation of America, after all, was religious freedom and individual God-given liberties. And if you remove God from that equation, what you have is government granted, government afforded, government awarded liberties. And we all know where that leads, right? It leads to the same crisis that we have been living under for over 2 years, where schools have been shut down, private businesses have been shut down, private businesses have been dictated by government bureaucrats, how they must deal with their customers, how they must enforce things like face mask mandates and proof of vaccines, things that aren't even constitutional on their face, because they haven't been legislatively passed. They've all been dictated by government bureaucrats, and largely by not even government bureaucrats who have been elected by the people, who have been duly elected by the people, by people like Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates, who toss out advisements and recommendations and what they consider best case health practices for the American citizenry, for the entire world, and then leftists in the government take those best case advisements, best medical practice recommendations, and impose them on the people as if, first off, they have the right to do so, and second off, as if these things have been passed into law. Well, they haven't been passed into law. None of them have been passed into law. We've been living under states of created, fabricated, and hyped and hoaxed medical emergency, national emergencies, one of which that Joe Biden just passed again in March. He declared the continuation of the national emergency of the coronavirus, which is bogus. And then they take those created emergencies and use them to justify clampdowns on freedoms on the American individual. If that's not called a crisis, I don't know what is. And certainly, these are the times that not only have tried men's souls, liberty-loving Americans, men and women's souls, but these are the times that continue to try men's souls, because now we have a president of the United States who is so feckless and weak that he has been run roughshod over by the far left of America and of the world, the elitists, the bureaucrats in the world government, the progressives, the socialists, the communists, who would love to take over America's resources and people and exploit all for global growth, for global power. And our president has pretty much turned a blind eye to what's taking place in America when it comes to God-given individual liberties. And he has played a major role in advancing the socialist/communist influences and infiltrations. And look, he's due to give his State of the Union. His State of the Union is going to contain such proclamations like, I've been the president who has brought forward the end of the pandemic, and I've been the president who has brought forward this great economy, and I've been the president who has brought forward the allowance to the people to remove the face mask on the adults and children, and I've been the president who has brought forward these great vaccines who have saved humanity from the sure death that COVID-19 would have brought. Well, it's all bogus. It's all a lie. It's all deception. It's all distraction. It's all major magic waves of wand to distract from the fact that here in America, we are rapidly, daily, losing our individual God-given rights. These are the times that try men's souls. It's certainly crisis time in America, and we need to realize that the loss of God-given is the end of America. And if America goes, where is the light of freedom in the world? That's it. If America goes, the globalists at the World Economic Forum, the globalists at the United Nations, the globalists in all these other nations that just look with lustful eyes at America, with hateful eyes at America, they win. America's final stand is keeping God-given at the helm and keeping government-granted, government service, government public servants in the role of public servants. These aren't the only times in America that have tried America's souls. If you go back in time to, of course, the American Revolution, when those fine words were first penned, and if you look at other spots in histories, there have been other decided spots in histories that have certainly tried the souls of good men and women everywhere. One of them that comes to mind is April 1945. There was plenty taking place in this particular month of this particular year. And there was actually a guy who has penned a book about this particular month and the monumental historical things that took place in this particular month. The book is April 1945, The Hinge of History. The author is Craig Shirley, and I'm so glad that he is on Bold and Blunt today to talk about some of the findings of his months and months and months of research that went into documenting what took place in April. For all you public school students out there who haven't had the proper history, this is a must-read. Craig, thank you for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cheryl, very, very much.
Congratulations on your new book, April 1945, The Hinge.
Thank you.
The Hinge of History. I love that title. And I wanted to ask you right off that you describe April 1945 as perhaps one of the most monumental months in human history. Can you explain that?
Sure. Simply put, every day is banner newspaper day. There is something monumental going on every day in the month of April 1945. Franklin Roosevelt dies, Hitler suicide, Mussolini is dragged down by the mob, and things too depraved to discuss were done to his body. Okinawa is raging, Dachau is discovered, Auschwitz is discovered. There's just, everything big and little. The Japanese are losing, but they still have American GIs, and in one episode, they take a group of American GIs, POWs, and make them dig a sand pit on the beach and on a small island in the Pacific, and make them march into the hole. Then they pour gasoline on them, they set them on fire.
Jeez.
The Maladie massacre happens in Maladie, France. The Japanese, in a truck, drive out 20 or 25, 30 American flyers, POWs, make them get out of the truck, and as they're standing there in the open fields, the Japanese set up machine guns and blow and shoot down the helpless American flyers. Something like this is happening every day in April 1945, and so and I wrote, of course, December 1941, which was about Pearl Harbor and its effects on the American population, the American population and culture. And so that was the same intent with April 1945, a companion book, if you will, to December 41, that would be mostly about what was going on here in the United States in that fateful month.
So, as Americans saw and read the headlines about the horrors that were being discovered that month, was that a point in time that you found during your research that America sort of lost some of its innocence?
We had already lost our innocence, Cheryl. I think with Pearl Harbor, we lost our innocence. That's where we lost our innocence. And in April 45, we well, we'd already grown up. We grew older as a country. We grew older and wiser as a country with all the things that were happening. This was the death of FDR was for the average American was earth shaking. Bob Dole wrote in his book A Soldier's Story that he was in the dugouts, in Italy, the trenches, and sleeping there in the rain at night and hearing fellow GIs weeping and crying over the death of Franklin Roosevelt.
Wow.
This is a man, when he was president, American children could cite three presidents: George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt. My mother was born in 1931, 32. When he died, he was he was the only president she knew, but she didn't know that how we got another president. She was still 11, 12 years old at the time. She wasn't really, old, sophisticated to understand that, presidential succession.
Right.
The Vice President Truman becoming president. For her, she was born in 1930. Franklin Roosevelt was the only president she ever knew. And there were millions of school children like that who were mystified who were mourning and mystified about who became president next, or how it all worked, or whatever. It was just an earth-shattering event. The world, because this was at the end of World War II. This is flags across the world were hung and went to half staff. There was a great deal of mourning all over the world. He was in many ways already the president of the world because he was the president. He was the leader of the Allies. Of the big three who represented the Allies against Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. And so, as the leader of the Allies, he was in some ways the leader of the world. He was known throughout the world.
Right.
And this was just a stupefying event.
The discovery of the concentration camps, what effect did that have on Americans? And aside from the obvious, because I know that when you do these books, you really dig deep into research, what did you find that surprised you about some of the reactions and responses?
Sure, I love this question. The Americans took it as a matter of course. It wasn't shell-shocked. It wasn't a earth-shattering event.
Really?
The New York Times and the Washington Post almost never reported that there were Jews who were being killed in the death camps. Of course, the Washington Post was essentially a Jim Crow newspaper anyway. They would report, if a white person was involved in a fatality or in a car accident, they wouldn't say, Cheryl Shumley, white, 29, of such and such street in Washington was killed today. But if a black person was involved in a fatality, they would write James Johnson, black, 39 of 29 Smith Street, Northwest, was involved in a fatality today. They always identified the race if it was an African American. They didn't have to identify the white race, but they always went out of their way. And many times these stories about these death camps in the New York Times and the Washington Post were buried. They weren't at front page news. They were done on A6 or A6 something like that. And many times they didn't even report that they were members of the Jewish faith that were exterminated in these camps. They just reported there were people exterminated in these camps. I don't know if it was ignorance. I think there was a touch of anti-Semitism on the part of both papers.
Given what we know today about the Holocaust, that in itself is shocking. I mean, that's almost a book in itself.
It is. I remember in 1941, the members of the Jewish faith were systematically being removed from cities in Germany, and only Time magazine reported about it. And there was a cruel story called "Wandering Jews," but how in Berlin, most of the doctors were Jewish, and they had all disappeared. Most of the dentists were Jewish, and they'd all disappeared. Most of the eye doctors were Jewish, and they'd all disappeared. And it was a story that was a report that was produced by the Manhattan Institute and released to newspaper publication. And the only newspaper, the only magazine that picked up on it was Time magazine. The Post, New York Times, nobody else reported on it.
Look at what just happened today, this week. You can kind of understand where people like Whoopi Goldberg would draw their ignorance of history from.
Exactly. There's still ignorance. I would blame public school education.
Yes.
She's a victim of public school education. Being so ignorant about such things. But that's a great point, is that still ignorance out there about the Holocaust. But not only, there's ignorance too, is that not only was it 6 million Jews, it was also 4 million gypsies,
yes,
homosexuals, political dissidents, Polish, workers, Russian slaves. They were also exterminated in the Nazi death camps. About the Nazi death camps, when you think about Auschwitz or Treblinka or Dachau. But I've looked at maps of Western Europe, and it was all of Western Europe was dominated by dozens of Nazi death camps, all over France, all over Germany, all over Poland, all over not Russia, of course, but every place, Holland. Every place you can think of in Western Europe had a Nazi death camp.
So it's disingenuous because I know that some of the Germans claimed that they did not know what was taking place in those camps down the road.
You and I both know that that's BS. How could 10 million people disappear overnight? You not knowing about it. Now Eisenhower, for instance, he made German populations go out and look at the Nazi death camps and look at the remains.
Yes.
And he filmed, and it was all filmed. All this archival information is at the Holocaust Museum or at other Holocaust museums. Eisenhower made the German people go out and look at the carnage that had happened. Is that even as tough an old bird as George S. Patton was, he liberated several Nazi death camps, and at one of them, he just broke down crying at the human carnage.
Yeah, anybody who's seen some of these historical footage of the victims there, you can't help but cry. I've seen how the German women were forced to dig proper graves for the victims of the camps, and it's horrible. And just getting back to your book, April 1945, The Hinge of History. What else did you find in your research that just shocked you? That just because you, with your wealth of history and your understanding, your experience in researching, you still must have come across stories that just really opened your eyes.
Yeah, Cheryl, it was that there was no honor. There's no honor. Honor among thieves, honor among because the German, the Luftwaffe was in charge of POW camps for American and British flyers, but they weren't good to them. They were miserable to them. They were terrible to them. They're absolutely the depravity on both the part of the Germans and the Japanese. There was a small Pacific island, quaint and beautiful, and with crashing seas and with coconut laden palm trees, and there was a native village, native class on the small island, and the Japanese suspected that they were pro-American, they were anti-Japanese, and they sent in machine guns, and they machine gunned down the entire island.
Oh,
everybody, everybody of these native Pacific, native islanders.
Wow.
Just blew them all away, and that was just the way that the Japanese were all the time.
I guess the last question that I would like to ask you is, reading what you read for this research and writing what you wrote in this book, April 1945, do you think that Americans in particular have learned enough from that history so as never to repeat those atrocities?
I like to think so. What's interesting is that we always swing to extremes. In the 20s and 30s, after World War I, we swung into isolationism. Is that we had on the books about immigration from various countries. We had the Neutrality Acts of the 1930s. 3 or 4 Neutrality Acts that were passed by a Democratic Congress and signed by a Democratic President, Roosevelt. And such, for instance, some Neutrality Acts restricted American troop movement from leaving the Western Hemisphere. And there were other strict Neutrality Acts that all had to be abrogated December 7th. They had to change the laws in order to fight a war. But then we swing to, we go, after World War II, we become drunk on internationalism. The United Nations was created in April of 1945, and there was actually a Republican congressman, get this, who proposed that we create an international book, school book printing, school book depository, so to create and distribute books to school books to the world. We'd make school books for Ethiopia, we'd make school books for Biafra, we'd make school books for Ukraine, and this kind of mindlessness, just took hold like an infection among American politicians in the post-war era. Is that there was all sorts of international ideas. Most of them were silly and dismissed, fortunately. But some weren't, like the United Nations. The United Nations was supposed to be a forum to solve the world's problems. Has it solved any problem in the years since it was created? No. We've had Gulf Wars, and we've had conflicts around the country, around the world, disagreements around the world, and they still go on. The United Nations is merely a forum for invective, but it really doesn't solve any of the problems of the world.
That's funny.
It doesn't solve any of the trade problems, doesn't solve any of the human rights problems. What has the United Nations done with the slave labor that's going on in China right now? Nothing.
Right. And like you said, born out of this exact same error. And here we are facing the problems that the UN usually brings us. They don't solve problems. They add more to us. And
yes.
April 1945, The Hinge of History. It's a great title. It's going to be another bestseller. And thank you so much for talking about it with me, Craig.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.
There's a principle that we are all familiar with. Those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat history. And that's worth considering right now as we look around at what's taking place in America, in the world, but of a special note, in America. And look at our President of the United States, our weak, mentally incapacitated President of the United States, who is being exploited by nations hostile to America at every turn. And we go into the next election cycle wondering, I wonder who I should vote for this time. Well, here's a hint. Not Joe Biden, not the Democrats. Whether we're talking about crises of pandemic proportions, of constitutional crises, or whether we're talking about crises of utter destruction of human souls, such as seen in April of 1945. We need strong leaders in America. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind as you head to the voting polls. Thank you for listening. Check out Bold and Blunt at edify.app/podcast or at Washington Times. And I want to give a quick mention. I have a new book coming out. It will be out in about a month. It's available for pre-order right now. If you want to learn more about the behind-scenes political shenanigans that went into this coronavirus crisis, this pandemic, politicization, go to Amazon right now and pre-order my new book, Lockdown: The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. You'll want to see what was going on behind the scenes, so guess what? You'll be armed with the proper information so history won't repeat. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time, and meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.